Hi there, and welcome back to Drawing a Residential Building Permit Set. I'm Chris, an architect working in the UK, and in this lesson, we're tackling one of the most important sheets for your permit package, the existing and the proposed sections and elevations. These drawings go hand in hand with your floor plans. They illustrate how the project looks in vertical view and in context, making it crystal clear to how your design impacts the height, scale, and streetscape. Done right, they give reviewers the full picture to help you sail through the permit process without delays. Here's what we'll cover together. Recreating the existing elevations and sections using Rayon's wall, block, and line styles to capture what's currently built. Organising with canvases and layers so the existing and the proposed versions stay aligned and consistent. Designing the proposed changes, highlighting alterations in volume, roof lines, windows, and materials. Adding clarity with annotations, dimensions, tags, labels to communicate changes for the reviewers. By the end of this lesson, you'll have a complete existing and proposed section and elevation set, a critical step that works alongside your floor plans to tell the whole story of your design. Everything will be demonstrated in Rayon Design, the platform that I use to produce this entire course. It's accurate, browser-based, and built to take you from the first sketches through to a professional permit set. It's also free, so if you haven't yet, create your account at rayon.design and download the free permit set template linked below. Open it up, follow along, and adapt it to your own project or permit requirements. You can also book a demo for a one-to-one session using the link below. Lastly, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to get more videos in this course and others. Now, let's get started. In the last lesson, we set up the existing and the proposed floor plans. Now it's time to take them vertically. Sections and elevations are the sheets that show your project's real-world impact, how they look inside and out. We're going to be using the views of our floor plans and rotate them to create an accurate grid onto which we will draft the sections. So let's get started. Okay, so we'll jump back into where we were last time. So we've got the existing plans from the ground floor, the first floor, our existing image, and then our proposed ground floor and first floor plans. So in terms of setting up our sections and elevations, we were provided survey drawings based on the plans, but these didn't include the sections and elevations, but we did receive spot heights. So these are obviously survey levels which are confirmed by the surveyor, which we can then draft from. So to set up our sections and elevations, we want to create a new canvas. So I can go into canvases over here. So we have our paper canvas, we have our model canvas, and I'm going to create a new model canvas. And call that sections and elevations, and this will create a new clean area. Now what I want to do is bring in a view of the plans, and that's because it retains the existing plans and the proposed plans. I'm not messing about touching those, but also it allows me to reference them and rotate them so I can project the lines down. So to start with, I'm just going to crop around the existing. I'm going to duplicate my view, just pan across. Now you want to make sure that you're looking at the view at 1:1, which means that it's the same scale as your current drawing. So we've got our views set up, and now I'm going to start putting in some guidelines. So I'll have a datum, so an outside ground level, and I'm going to set that at 0. Based on your survey, it may be an AOD level, and that's above sea level, but based on my survey, that's 0. Now, from the survey information, I know that my ground floor is 150 millimeters above that level. So that's my internal ground floor level. I also know that my window head level is at 2621 millimeters. My eaves height is 2940. My upstairs sill height is 3755. And my window head height on the first floor is 5240. And then finally, my ridge height is 6795. So I've just set up my datums, and these are all the spot heights that are provided on the survey. If you don't have those, you can always count bricks, or you can do it by eye, but obviously bear in mind it won't be quite as accurate. The other thing I like to do is to take my straight on photograph that I've taken and try and scale that as well. So I can set this against my known datums. I can scale the drawing down. So, set my ridge height to align here and my ground floor level in here. and very roughly that's reading pretty well. I mean, obviously I've got the sort of skew of the camera, but this obviously gives us a hand in terms of when we start to draw. So next, for the guidelines, I can set some vertical guidelines. So obviously if I'm drawing from the ground floor first, it's useful to have at least the openings and the external wall locations set. So now I know, for example, that I can start drawing some rough lines. I'll do my external floor level, and I know that the main body of my building with that central pitch will sit in here somewhere, because my eaves level is around here. So let's just offset our eaves by 150 mil, and then we can draw this rough shape. Trim that back. Now obviously we've got our windows and door openings here. Just going to create a rough rectangle for the minute, which I can then add detail to later. Just going to add a line in for the internal floor level, so that'll be around the damp course level. And so I've got this sort of brick course here, which is about 900 high. And then I can move this view across and then place in this one. And now I can adjust my guidelines to be reading the window opening on the first floor. You can see they're aligned with that. So that gives you an incredibly rough outline, but I know that those key points, those datum points, are set on realistic levels. And then finally I just add in the roof line of the garage. And there you have a very, very rough outline of an elevation, but at least I know that all of these points are factually correct. They're measured levels and they're based on real world information, and they're taken from the plans and the survey. Okay, before I start developing that elevation too much, I want to go over to the section, and I always find that doing this is much more helpful than wasting too much time making the elevation beautiful before I've double checked all the heights internally, because that's what really matters when I'm thinking about the internal space. So what I'm going to do is just copy this line work across over to our other view of the ground floor. Now this can obviously serve as our baseline for our sections. What I'm going to do is just group it. So that sits on our elevation layer. I'm going to make sure it is aligned. So let's set an outside wall. Let's make sure it's aligned. And then I'm going to be able to lock the elevation layer. And the elevation layer is really there to guide me when I'm now drawing the section. And again, we can just double check, set up our guidelines. And obviously with the section, we need to decide where we're cutting the section. And I always kind of think about it in terms of what's going to be illustrating or communicating the most out of the building. And also when we're dealing with a planning case, for example, we need to think about where we're going to be putting the interventions. So I know, for example, that I'm going to be adding a dormer to the back bedroom and I'm going to be adding a dormer to the front bedroom. So I want two sections in essence. So I know that if I have a section through this way, and then when I rotate the plan the other way, I'll have a section through the guest bedroom, and that will cover both bases. So for the case here where I'm looking into the plan this way, I really want a section that cuts through the kitchen and the utility space downstairs, and that will pick up the dormer and the ensuite bathroom that we're designing upstairs. So let's say our section is about here, for example. So instead of drawing base lines, we can now use the wall tool. So if we go to the wall tool, so I'm just going to draw two walls that I'm going to be using, so I can then go in to replace all, set that as external. On this one, I can set that as internal, and now I can start drawing with the wall tool. So I'll pick a style and I can very basically just start drawing the external wall. And at a very basic level, that is the kind of outside of the building. Again, I want to double check the internal height. So we've been given the floor to ceilings. Okay, so I know that the internal floor to ceiling height of the ground floor is 2588. So I'm going to set up a datum line there. And I know that the datum line of the internal floor level is 2920. So that gives me my internal floor zone of 182 millimeters. So I need to set up a wall type, which is acting as a floor in essence, for 182 millimeters. So I'm going to detach that style. I'm going to set it to 182, and I'm going to create a new style, call it internal floor. And then I can use that, make sure I pick a style, and I can use that internally. And then I also know that my internal height of my first floor is 2558. And again, these are just from the spot heights from the survey. And again, I can add a wall type in here. That's obviously sitting within the roof space. So we've set up those sort of the levels, those parameters. And then again, I can go over to my guidelines, and I can see where I'm cutting through on the internal walls. So again, I can do the wall tool, I can pick the internal wall, set that, and then when I've figured out the ground floor, I can then change that view over. So I'm just going to move these, swap these two views for the second, move this one over, just clear up some of those guidelines, and then I'm going to copy the guidelines here and here because they set the inside line of my internal walls. And again, I can set my wall tool, I can pick a style to my internal wall, and then that draws these internal spaces. So you have that volume contained within the roof, and then those void spaces around. And I like to add an annotation line, a little cross in that space to say basically it's not part of the living space, and I can mirror that across, and the same one here. There we go. So having drawn those very basic front on elevation and section, and I want to show you how to do the side elevations. So because we're looking at a view of the floor plan, I can literally just rotate it. So I can just rotate that there, lock it to 90 degrees. And if we go back to the model canvas of the proposed and existing plans, we've not changed the drawing. So like I said, we're only looking at a rotated version of it. So like this, and we'll set this one just here. So we've got our sort of datum levels set up, and now we're looking at the side elevation. So we can move across some of our guidelines, extent of the building, and then the window openings. So now we have that side elevation set up. So I can unlock my elevation layer, and I can drag this ground line across. And then I can start projecting those lines that I drew previously. So we've got our eaves line, we've got our ridge line, we obviously have our wall lines, and you can see that there's a bit of return from the fascia. So we'll set that off the face of the wall, let's say 75 mil. You can also use the trim tool. So with that original line selected, any of those intersecting lines can be trimmed. So that's very basically our roof form. And if you wanted to, we could form this as a rectangle. And that would mean that when we want to add a fill, for example, it reads that continuous shape. Now, obviously, at the moment, I've shown the windows very basically, but with Rayon's block tool, it has a really extensive library of not only floor plan views, so where you're cutting through the windows and doors, but also elevation and section. So I'm going to jump over to the block table. We'll go into libraries and we can find windows. Any of these elements that have the little purple symbol also have different views. So they have a plan view, a front view, and a section view. So for example, I can drag in this front view and I have a ready-made window component that I can easily adjust or adapt to sit in, as you see there, that relates to my floor plan. So I know my head height of my windows, and we can check our sill height to align with this brick coursing. So then I can adjust this window to suit. And similarly, there's a whole array of different styles of windows, different types of openings, even ornate design windows as well. So everything that you would want already pre-made, and obviously you can adjust these. You can also create your own blocks. So if I couldn't find something that was suitable, so if I had a intricate detail, or if I had something that was quite different in terms of its styling, I could design it within Rayon, I could draw it, and then I could create a block out of it. So for example, this bay window or this door here with the arched head, maybe there's not one of those within the library, but I can draw it and then I can create it as a block, and then I can share that and use it later in other designs. Okay, so I've just spent a bit more time finalizing the drawing of the elevation, adding a lot more detail to it, and you can see that where my sort of bare bones elevation was before, those sort of frames remain, and then I've sort of added the interesting detail, the ornate elements that I've picked up from the photograph that you can see on the right hand side. And as I said before, this window, for example, I've drawn from scratch because there wasn't one that quite fitted from the Rayon library, but I can select all of this line work, for example, right click on it and then create a block out of it. So if I needed a similar bay window in the future, that could then live in my library, and it's as easy as that. So then that now exists as a block. You can see it on the right hand side, the block definition there, and that sits in my custom library and could be shared amongst my team. The other thing I want to show you is in terms of line weights and fills. So for example, the ground floor line, I want to have a nice thick line. So in terms of styles, I can create a new style. I can call it ground line, for example, and I can set that to something a bit thicker. You can see that update there. And similarly, maybe the outline of the building wants to be a thicker line as well. So I can saber style all that outline. For example, and then I can just go around and pick the lines that I want, use the picker style, and that will update those as well. So with the lines now having a bit of differentiation in terms of line weights, we can now also add shadows, we can add tones and textures. So I'll show you a few examples of those on this front elevation. So I'm going to turn off these guidelines because we've got that sort of base level of information there. And as an example, you can see here that the fascia and those sort of timber elements are in a dark stained wood, for example. So I can use the paint bucket tool. So in editing tools, there's a bucket, and that basically reads the outline of those lines, reads that area, and then can be filled with a solid color. It can be a gradient. We can have a texture in there, a hatch, or we can add in our own image if we wanted, for example. So I'm just going to put in a sort of a gray color for now, very quickly. You start to bring the drawing to life. It looks a lot closer to the material. And we could do exactly the same thing for windows, for example. So we go back to the bucket tool, we could set a light blue color and then just go around filling those just like you would in Photoshop or something like that. The other thing you can do is add textures, for example. So this area at the bottom is actually a brick course. So you can see here that stands out against the rendered upper element. So I could create a sort of polyline that follows that space, which I'll do here. The sort of traces under the sill, goes up and around. That creates a space, and then I can add a fill to that space. So again, I could go for a color if I wanted to, or even a texture. So you can see here we've got a brick texture. I can change the opacity of that. I can even change the scale. So in the transform, if those bricks weren't quite coming out at the right scale for my drawing, I can change that as well. It's starting to add a lot more life to the drawing, material definition. And lastly, I can add some shadows. So again, I could use the polyline tool and I could say indicatively, I'm just going to add a shadow here. I can add a fill. I can make that semi-transparent. I'll remove the stroke to soften it, and then I can copy that across. I can adjust those points to fit different instances, right here, for example. And again, you can just copy those across. I can even set that up as a style, say shadow. So whenever I use shadow in my drawing, it has a consistent transparency, for example. So, even if I go back and say there'll be a shadow against the fascia here, I can do pick a style, and there we go. Okay, and then with a little bit more time spent, this is the result. So I refined down, I've chosen to go down the sort of texture route. So, everything is looking as the materials as per the existing. And I think when you compare that to the existing photo, it's looking pretty accurate. And obviously I can then go around, I've set up the sort of style of the drawing, and I can do that for the rest of the 3 other elevations. And these are the rest of the elevations. So you can see the rear and the 2 side elevations, one side showing the garage and one side showing the other windows. So yeah, I think they make a nice set of drawings. Now on to the sections, and I tend to go back and forth between these drawings to really sort of refine them down, add details, and sort of adjust as I go. The other really beneficial thing of having drawn the elevations first, they can then feed back into the sections. So as an example, where I'm cutting through in this room, I'm actually going to be looking at that external window that I've drawn in this elevation. So I can easily pick that up and copy that across to that view. So now I'm looking at that, but from the inside. And again, I can add textures and tones, more information from the internal. Here, for example, I can now define where I'm looking at those windows that I've drawn from the inside. So this large picture window here, and exactly the same with the door here and this little window. And in essence, the more detail you add, the more life you're kind of bringing to the drawings. You can submit the sort of bare bones drawings, but I always find it helpful to add a bit of life to these things, add detail, because people do appreciate it. Obviously, the other really helpful thing you can do, where I'm setting up both my sections, I can just mirror that whole section, and I know that I've got the sort of base of that information. So, for example, I know that I'm going to be copying this section and looking at it the other way. So I'm going to be cutting through sort of this space. I know that then if I just mirror my section, I align it with my guidelines, the design and volume of the space will be exactly the same because of the type of building that I'm working on. Obviously these internal things will need to change, but that base information is there. Okay, so again, I've just spent a bit more time adding to the sections, and you can see here with a bit of shadow, with a bit of tone internally to distinguish the internal to the external, adding a thicker sort of ground space, adding some shadow as well, really helps the drawings read better and help people understand them. So that's my existing set of elevations and sections, and hopefully you can see that that's quite quick and easy to do, particularly given the way Rayon is set up with those views, with those canvases, and with the block library. Having set up the existing sections and elevations, we can now focus on developing our design proposal, adapting and editing as we go to correspond with our proposed plan. So let's get drawing. Okay, so now with the proposed. So now I want to change my views because I'm looking back at the floor plans to the proposed plans. So I'm going to try and bring in the proposed roof plan because that's what's being affected, that first floor area with those dormers. Make sure that I'm at 1:1 scale. So now I'm going to look at that in reference to my drawings. So one thing I'm going to do is create a block. So I'm going to block the existing, and that means it stays as is. And I'm going to move all these down, and then I'm going to duplicate them to create a set for my proposed. And the reason I'm starting with the section is because I want to make sure that that internal space is working before I start projecting that external space. So let's just go over to the floor plan. We're just going to set up those guidelines of that main volume of space that we're creating. And we can see it in here. So in essence, I'm going to be creating a new volume in this zone. I'm going to be pushing this vertical wall back down to here. The bed head can sit nicely in that recess, and I'm creating a full height space for the dormer. So you can see here, we'd continue that ceiling level in there. We've got our edge of our dormer here, and then we've got this new internal wall in here. So just while I'm working, I'm just going to turn off these tones. So we can bring our new wall line back to here, and we can trim those roof lines back to create that new inner volume. Let's just clear this space out. Again, we'll just create a new wall, and we're basically recessing this void space back. So in essence, we're sort of creating one bedroom volume in this space. I'll just illustrate that with a pink fill, and then a rectilinear volume in this space that you can see there. So that's our sort of master bedroom and then our ensuite. This will then obviously have a roof, a pitch roof that sits comfortably with the external space, and ideally we want that to follow the same pitch as the existing. So with that very basic volume set, we can now think about how that impacts the elevation. And I just wanted to do that so I know that those spaces work, the head heights work, basically proving the plan makes sense, I suppose. So we can move across maybe our side elevation. And I want to copy this view. And again, I can rotate it because I'm looking at a view of that. Let's make sure we're aligned. And again, we can bring those guidelines for those dormer edges down. And again, because this is a sort of symmetrical building, I'm just going to draw one of them for now, and then I can copy those across. So then I just want to project those lines across and turn off the texture so I can see what I'm doing. Bring in those two side walls, and obviously again we've got our sort of roof pitch, our roof overhang that's sitting sort of here. And what I really want to do is bring in this sort of arts and crafts style. So I'm going to have a sort of double pitch roof that has this little valley feature. And then we can see where the window sits centrally within that space. And again, I can go to the Rayon block library and I can find either a window that I've used before. So if you have a look into my blocks, for example, you can find some of the windows that we used previously. So we probably want the window head to align there. And that's the thing, I'm kind of thinking in 3 dimensions, looking at the plan, looking at the section, and doing things as I go. Okay, and then I can find the center line of that roof, and then I can just mirror my dormer across. So then they sit perfectly and nice and symmetrically across the roof scape. And again, if I wanted to then transfer that across to the front elevation, I can then read that in conjunction with the lines that I've set up, but I can also create another view looking back at that section. I can go back to layers and I can do a new view, and I can look back at my own drawing. So I can find the section, make sure I'm at 1:1, and I can align that perfectly behind my elevation. And then all I'm doing is basically tracing the outline that I've just created for my section. Move that view back, and there I've got my side elevation of my dormer, and I can add just a little element there, and there we have it. So having drawn the dormers across the side elevation, the back elevation, and the front elevation, I can now add a bit of color to make them fit and sit in better with the elevation. I can go back to my bucket tool, for example, and I can start adding in some tones. Yeah, maybe I want the same sort of roof texture as over there, and maybe the fascia wants to be similar to that wood texture. Yeah, so very quickly you can see how that can start to match in. And similarly here, I've added in some timber paneling, which sets those sort of 3 panels with the central one being the window, and I can add in that glass texture that I set previously. So go to the style and I could find the glass, and that then creates that window style. And I know that obviously it matches in with the rest of the drawing because I've set that style up. And then moving forward into the sections, obviously the best way to bring these to life is to look into how the space is being used. So here we're cutting through the master bedroom and then into the ensuite. So, let's imagine what is happening inside there. So a master bed and a bathroom ensuite. So again, we can go to the block library. I can search for maybe king size bed. And again, because you've got this purple line here, you have multiple views. So you can bring in a side view of the bed and maybe a person. and maybe a house plant. And again, you can layer those so they sit comfortably with each other. And similarly, I could add in a skirting line and a tiling line. And you can see it starts to bring those spaces to life. Okay, and then I've just spent a little bit more time finalizing the elevations. So you can see here now the dormers with the colors added, both front and back elevation. We've got that side elevation showing the 3 panels with the window in the center. And then I think the sections are working really well. So we've got that master bedroom space. We've got the ensuite now with the sink. So, you can stand at the sink looking out the window, which is nice. And then we've got that dressing area in the front bedroom. So you can see someone, utilizing that space, some storage, the cupboards, and everything's starting to look a lot more convincing, and hopefully convincing to the planners. So I think that's making a really nice set of existing and proposed elevations and sections. With both the existing and the proposed sections and elevations completed, we now add annotations to better communicate the intent behind the drawings. Okay, so let's start to clarify the drawings by adding a number of annotations. So we'll start by adding datum heights to the sections and elevations. So obviously we've been setting our guidelines, and you can see here these are the kind of known heights of the building that we want to be communicating. So again, I can go back into the block library and I can find title blocks and annotations. Now we have a whole array of different annotations with elevation markers, scale bars, north points, alongside elevation markers. So I can just drag and drop that in here. I'm going to scale it up slightly so it'll be legible on the page, and I can change the color of it. So I can go into the block. I could change this to what color should we go with? Let's go with an orange color, nice and bright. Change the line, there we go. So every instance of that block will now appear like that. I obviously place that on the line that I'm referencing. So my outside line, so my ground level, I'm going to set that at 0. Obviously it's different if you're using AOD levels, which are the levels above sea level, for example. But I can add a tag to say 0.15 for the internal floor level. So I can add a annotation note to that, so internal FFL. And again, I can create a orange text style for that, and then we can copy that up. And we're going to say eaves level, so that was 2920. Existing eaves level. And then just as an example, we'll add existing ridge level, 6795. And you can obviously do this for the existing and the proposed. And you can choose how much important information you want to include on that in terms of heights. The other thing that we can do is add internal dimensions, so internal floor to ceiling levels. So this could be simple as a dimension. So again, I can create orange dims maybe. I can create a style, change the color. I can change the stroke color. Maybe the text size is larger, and I can even change the type of end lines, the tail. So that looks good. And that's now saved as a style. So then whenever I go back to add another dimension, I can then use my pick a style tool, and that changes it. So obviously these reference points, these datum lines, will want to appear on each of our drawings. So whether it's a plan or a section. So we can copy those across and make sure they correspond to those drawings, but we can also add a series of annotations. So for example, these could be around what the proposal is, what's being retained. It could be around the materiality, for example. So I could add a leader, which is this one here, and proposed dormer extension. And again, I can create a new orange leader, for example. And again, so proposed dormer extension, and we can say, chimney should be retained, or something like existing windows to be replaced with like for like double glazed units. So they look the same, but they have a higher performance. Now, the other thing we can do is add a hatch to the existing to illustrate where the proposed will be in relation to that. So just like we've done on the plans, you've got the red for demolition, you've got the blue for the proposed, we can do that with the dormers, for example. So I could create a zone, let's say it's a polyline as an example, that basically roughs out that proposed mass and then has it superimposed onto the existing. And this could be a dashed line, for example. You know, it'd be great to have it in that same blue color that we used for our floor plan. So you can see there, I can use that same blue color and we can add a note to that saying proposed dormer extension. And this obviously gives an indication of where that new mass is sitting in relation to the existing building elevation. Okay, so I've just gone through and added the final dimensions, added some more notes and annotations. You can see there those areas in blue that we showed previously where the new mass is being added. And then we've added some dimensions to the proposed and added a number of new levels to those dormer ridges and eaves. So really the drawings now are really communicating what they need to be. And hopefully making it very clear for the people that are going to be reviewing those drawings. Okay, and then the final thing I want to do is go back into the proposed plan canvas. So you remember that is a separate canvas. So we'll jump back to the existing and the proposed plans. And I just want to illustrate where the elevations and the sections are coming from. So again, I can go to the block library and we have elevation markers, which here, so I can drag and drop those in, scale them up so they're visible, and then we can set those as our 4 elevations. And then I can also find sections, so I can search in the block library, which what I do very often, and we can have this section line. Again, we'll just scale it up and we can place our section line so it's legible for those that are reading the plans. And obviously we can copy these across to our other drawing as well. So we're cutting through the center of that window and through the center of the window above. Okay, so now with the annotations, dimensions, and notes added to the sections and elevations, let's get these sheets set up. Okay, so to get these on sheets, you remember last time with the paper canvas, we have these sheets already set up. So we've got our front cover, our legend, our site plan, and our existing and proposed plans. So I want to create a series of existing and proposed sections and elevations. So I can do that very, very easily. So we can go to view, so we can go to page, and that creates a new page. We can set that to A3, and obviously we want it to align. I'm going to create 4 drawings. I'm going to duplicate these pages, and then I'm going to copy across a drawing sheet onto each of those because they are drawings. And so we're going to have existing sections, existing elevations, proposed sections, and proposed elevations. And I'll show you some different scales and layouts that we can do with those. Okay, so we can start adding the views to the sheets. So I'm going to go to layers, to the view, and then go to the existing and proposed floor plan canvas. So you can see there I'm now looking at the existing plans. So I'm going to set the scale to 1 to 100, and then I can command and drag that crop boundary around those views, and then I can position it neatly on the sheet. Again, I can copy one over, and then I can double check my scale, my alignment, and that's now the existing ground and first floor. I can then obviously go over to my titles that I've created previously and add those. So existing ground floor, first floor plan. And now we want to bring in the 2 sections. So we go into view again, but instead of the proposed plan canvas, we're referencing the existing elevations and section canvas. So you can see there, we've got the 2 sections that we produced earlier. So again, we can set the scale to 1 to 100, double click to go into there, and then I can bring in crop boundary. And again, we can move those, and then I can go to the other view. And again, we can use these guidelines to make sure that everything is nice and aligned on the page, and then we can copy our title. So existing and existing. So that's one way of setting up the sheet. And I'm just going to show you with the elevations very quickly. You just do exactly the same process of new view, elevations and sections. You obviously find the existing, set the scale, crop, position across, and then you just change obviously the thing that you're looking at in the crop. But again, that's how you set up those elevations, and we can very quickly copy across those notes, and we can obviously reference the elevation tag, so 1, 2, 3, 4, with the titles of those elevations. For the proposed, I'll show you a different sort of format. So again, we can create a new view, create a proposed plan, and I'll scroll down to our proposed first floor plan. I'm going to change the scale. This proposed plan on one side, and then I can have a section on the other. So in the elevations and sections, I can change the scale to 1 to 50. And your local jurisdiction will have requirements in terms of what scale you want to be producing this information at. So again, this gives a better idea of the sort of space in comparison with the two, for example. And then, you know, for example, with these, if we wanted to show the other section, I could add in the roof plan as an example, and then change the section to looking the other way. And obviously I can adjust my notes and annotations so they sit nicely within the crop boundary. But in terms of the actual information, we're not producing any different information. We're just looking at the drawing at a different scale. And again, we can add our title notes. We can add all the notes to the sheets. But those are sort of 4 ways that we can create different levels of information for the existing and proposed. And then I've just spent a little bit more time refining those sheets down. So now we've got our existing floor plans, ground floor and first floor, our existing sections, our existing elevations with that zone highlighted for where we're making amends to those. We've got those larger plans and sections which really communicate the space and the quality of the space that we're creating. Those proposed elevations where those dormers are sitting very comfortably. And then our roof plan and our section looking the other way. So hopefully that sits as a really coherent and clear set alongside our previously produced site plan and existing and proposed floor plans. That's a wrap for lesson 3 of drawing a residential building permit set. By now, you've completed both the existing and the proposed sections and elevations. And together with your floor plans, these sheets form the backbone of your permit set, demonstrating scale, context, and compliance in a way that reviewers can't overlook. Don't forget, you can use the free editable permit set template linked below to save time and keep your drawings consistent. In lesson 4, we'll shift into creating detailed opening schedules, documenting which windows and doors are being replaced or added. These schedules are often mandatory depending on your jurisdiction, since exterior changes must comply with local regulations. We'll keep building out the details and the documentation of the permit set to ensure that your project gets approved. If today's lesson helps streamline your workflow, drop a comment and share how you'll be applying it to your own projects. And of course, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next lesson.